Rome, the empire that gave us roads, aqueducts, concrete domes, and a legal system that still shapes courts today. But behind the marble columns and the poetry of Virgil was a justice system built on fear. Ancient Rome didn't just punish criminals. It made examples of them, in public, in the gurest ways imaginable, to keep an empire of millions in line. Today we're counting down the 10 most brutal punishments Rome ever handed out, from slow, agonizing executions to punishments designed to strip a person of their humanity before they even died. Some of these are so strange and specific that you won't believe they were real legal procedures. Stick around, because number 1 is one of the most bizarre and horrifying punishments in all of human history. Before we start, a quick note. This video covers real historical practices of capital punishment and execution in a factual, educational way. Nothing here is intended to glorify violence. This is history, not a how-to. Let's begin. Starting at number 10, flagellation or scourging sounds almost tame compared to what's coming, but it was often just the opening act of a much longer ordeal. The Roman flagrum was a short whip with several leather thongs, sometimes weighted with pieces of bone or metal at the tips, designed to tear skin rather than just bruise it. Roman law actually had different whips for different classes of people. Citizens were technically protected from the worst of it under normal circumstances, while slaves and non-citizens could be scourged far more severely and without the same legal restraint. Flagellation was rarely a punishment on its own. It was most often used as a precursor to execution, to weaken and torment the condemned before their death, as a disciplinary punishment for soldiers who broke military law, and as a method of extracting confessions from slaves, whose testimony under Roman law was only considered valid if given under torture. That tells you a lot about how deeply cruelty was baked into the everyday machinery of Roman law, not just reserved for dramatic public executions. At number 9, not every brutal punishment in Rome ended in a quick death. Sometimes the cruelty was in how long it took. Damnatio ad mutta, condemnation to the mines, sentenced criminals to hard labor in Rome's mines and quarries under conditions historians widely regard as a slow death sentence. Prisoners were often shackled in chains, branded on the forehead to mark them permanently as convicts, and worked without rest in cramped, poorly ventilated tunnels. Cave-ins, toxic air, exhaustion, and disease killed most prisoners within a few years, some far sooner. Unlike a public execution, there was no crowd, no spectacle, just a name that quietly disappeared from the world, worked to death underground. A person sentenced to the mines lost their legal status entirely, becoming property of the state, existing solely to be used until they broke. At number 8, Damnatio Memoriae, condemnation of memory, didn't kill the body, it killed the identity. This was a formal condemnation applied mostly to disgraced emperors, politicians, and public figures after their death or downfall. The Senate could order that a person's name be erased from all public records, their statues destroyed or defaced, their face chiseled off coins, and any mention of them in official documents scrubbed out. We still see the physical evidence of this today in museums, with inscriptions where names have been gouged out and statues with faces deliberately smashed. The Emperor Geta, murdered by his own brother Caracalla, was subjected to this, with monuments across the empire having his image and name violently removed. Roman punishment wasn't only about physical pain. Sometimes the ultimate penalty was being erased from history itself, a fate some Romans reportedly feared more than death. At number 7, decimation wasn't for civilians, it was reserved for Rome's own soldiers, and it's where the word decimate actually comes from. If a Roman military unit was found guilty of cowardice, mutiny, or desertion, commanders could order decimation. The unit was divided into groups of 10, and each group drew lots. The one soldier unlucky enough to draw the short straw was then killed, typically beaten to death, by the other 9 men in his group, using clubs or stones rather than swords. It wasn't an anonymous executioner carrying out the sentence. It was your own comrades, forced to kill you with their bare hands and improvised weapons. Survivors weren't spared either, often forced to camp outside the fortified camp walls and given barley instead of wheat rations as a mark of shame. Decimation was rare, and precisely because it was so rare, it was devastatingly effective. At number 6, Damnatio ad Gladium, condemnation to the sword, is where the arena enters the story. This meant a criminal was sentenced to fight as a gladiator, but with a crucial difference from professional gladiators. These were unarmed or poorly trained condemned prisoners, thrown into the arena purely to die for public entertainment. Some were forced to fight one another to the death in succession until only one remained, and that survivor would then be killed anyway or forced to fight again until they too fell. Others were made to fight professional gladiators or wild animals with minimal or no weapons and armor, turning the fight into a public execution dressed up as sport. The Colosseum and amphitheaters across the empire weren't just entertainment venues, they were instruments of state terror. At number 5, Damnatio ad Bestias, condemned to the beasts, is perhaps one of the most infamous Roman punishments, sentencing criminals to be killed by wild animals in the arena, lions, leopards, bears, and other exotic predators imported from across the empire specifically for this purpose. This punishment was typically reserved for the lowest classes of criminals: slaves, deserters, and those convicted of especially serious crimes such as treason or arson. Christians during periods of Roman persecution were also frequently condemned this way, a fact widely documented by both Roman and early Christian sources. The condemned were usually sent into the arena unarmed, sometimes tied to a stake to prevent them from fleeing, making any semblance of a fight impossible. Historians note that seats often emptied during this segment of the games, since even many Romans considered it particularly grim. At number 4, crucifixion, almost certainly the most well-known Roman execution method, was designed with one goal above all others: maximum suffering over the maximum amount of time in full public view. It was considered so degrading that Roman citizens were largely exempt from it, reserved instead for slaves, foreigners, pirates, and those convicted of treason or rebellion. The condemned were typically stripped, beaten, and forced to carry the crossbeam of their own cross to the execution site, both as further humiliation and as a very literal, visible warning to the public. Death by crucifixion was rarely quick, with victims dying slowly over hours or even days from a combination of exhaustion, exposure, and asphyxiation. Roman authorities frequently left bodies on crosses for extended periods afterward, so the site would continue to serve as a warning. Following the massive slave rebellion led by Spartacus in 71 BCE, Roman forces reportedly crucified thousands of captured rebels along the Appian Way, turning an entire highway into a miles-long warning sign. At number 3, Poena Cullei, the punishment of the sack, is where Roman punishment starts to feel less like law and more like ritual horror, reserved for one of the most severe crimes in Roman society: parricide, the murder of a parent or other close family member. The condemned was sewn into a leather sack along with a set of live animals, commonly a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey, and thrown into a river or the sea. The animals were chosen deliberately for symbolic reasons tied to Roman ideas about treachery and unnatural behavior, though the exact reasoning is debated among historians. The punishment wasn't really about how the person died. It was about denying them a normal death and burial altogether, since Romans believed being denied contact with earth, air, and proper burial condemned the offender's spirit as well as their body. At number 2, Damnatio ad flammas, burning alive, was used for a specific category of crimes that Romans considered attacks on the fabric of society: arson, sacrilege, and treason among them. Sources describe the condemned being bound to a stake and burned before crowds, sometimes as part of larger public execution events. Fire held particular symbolic weight in Roman culture, creating a grim symmetry between crime and punishment that Roman audiences would have understood immediately. During periods of persecution, this method was also used against religious minorities, particularly early Christians, who were sometimes burned in mass public spectacles. The historian Tacitus described Emperor Nero using burning as punishment following the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, when Christians were blamed and subjected to horrific public executions, a claim that remains debated among historians, but reflects how brutal these punishments were remembered even by Roman writers themselves. And finally, at number 1, the Tarpeian Rock captures everything uniquely terrifying about Roman justice. Located on the southern summit of Rome's Capitoline Hill, it was a steep cliff used for centuries as an execution site, where traitors, murderers, and those who committed the most serious crimes against the Roman state were thrown to their deaths below. What makes this punishment stand out isn't just the method, it's the location's symbolism. The Capitoline Hill was the religious and political heart of Rome, home to the great temple of Jupiter, so executing criminals there sent an unmistakable message. Crimes against the state were crimes against Rome's gods themselves. According to Roman tradition, the site got its name from Tarpeia, a figure from early Roman legend who betrayed the city to the Sabines and was killed for her treachery, making the location itself a permanent monument to the price of betrayal centuries before it became an active execution site. Unlike Crucifixion or the arena, which were spectacles stretched out for hours or days, the Tarpeian Rock offered swift, public, symbolically loaded death, performed in the shadow of Rome's most sacred temple, for anyone who threatened the Republic or later the Empire itself. It stands as the perfect final entry, because it shows that Roman punishment was never just about the physical act. Every method on this list carried meaning, a message to the living, delivered through the suffering of the condemned. Rome built one of history's most advanced civilizations and one of its most ruthless justice systems. These punishments weren't isolated acts of cruelty, they were deliberate tools of social control, designed to keep an empire spanning 3 continents in line through fear, spectacle, and public memory. What's your reaction to these? Which one shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient Roman history, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content exploring the darker corners of the ancient world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.